It's the 17th of the 12th. I'm Arthur Falls, and this is Beyond Bitcoin. Nothing you hear on today's episode is investment advice. A few days ago, I was privileged to speak with Jeffrey Tucker, the man behind Liberty.me, executive editor of Laissez-Faire Books, distinguished fellow of the Foundation for Economic Education. The list goes on and on. Only fitting then that during this deep and comprehensive discussion, my recording software should crash, surreptitiously ignoring half an hour of the most thought-provoking discourse I've been lucky enough to engage in. But what remains is published here in full and serves as a cutting-edge perspective on how developments in cryptocurrency are changing how we understand money, the world it inhabits, and also bow ties. While the lost content is a small tragedy, Jeffrey's prolific writings are a fantastic source of informed commentary, which I suggest everyone who is interested in the subjects discussed in today's episode should explore. Because you only just touched on it, but I thought it was really intriguing. In particular, do you think you could compare Mises and Menger's views on how money first derives value?
Yeah, so you want to take them? Let's take them one at a time because they are kind of different. They evolved. Obviously, Mises learned a lot from Menger, but Menger really lays out the first clear modern explanation of where money comes from. And his idea is that it's a gradual and evolutionary process that emerges out of regular trade in the real world. So as you move from barter to indirect exchange, there's a commodity that gradually emerges as being more valuable than all the other commodities. And it does so because it has particular properties that are associated with money. Fungibility, meaning that you can, like one unit is just the same as any other unit. A certain durability so that it doesn't just die and fall apart. Divisibility is a hugely important thing. Scarcity is also important. There's a lot of things that sort of constitute these various features throughout history, and you've seen salt emerge as money, seashells, beaver pelts, all these things. But the more a commodity approaches these kinds of features, the more likely it is to be chosen for money, and gradually over time, gold and silver become that. So Menger describes this process as essentially entrepreneurial. So. You have people trying out various monies to see if they work. And sometimes something can be money for a little while and then be demonetized, replaced by another money. Sometimes money can be used in a particular geographic area, for particular kinds of trades and not other kinds of trades. And all this happens as a particular commodity develops sort of the property of moneyness. So Menger didn't see it as either money or non-money. It was just something that was an evolving, emerging process to discover what money is. And eventually, as the process sort of runs itself through, the range of applicability or usability of the currency grows and becomes more generalized. But this is a long process. I think Menger uses figures like 10, 50, or 100 years sometimes for something to emerge as a dominant money. But nothing ever becomes money sort of on a permanent basis. So the evolution essentially never stops. Entrepreneurs are always busy finding other monies. And, you see this sort of Mengerian process play itself out, all the time, really, in black markets. Sometimes things will emerge as money. There was a few years ago where laundry detergent in Baltimore County in the U.S. became money. And in prisons, there's always a big struggle for what money is going to be. I talked to a guy who was spent a couple of years in jail, and I talked to him about the monetary economy in jails, and he said that ramen noodles, those little packages of dried noodles, were money. That people would collect them. So what distinguishes a money function, the way you deal with it, is that instead of acquiring the good for consumption purposes, you're specifically acquiring the good in order to trade it for another good. So then it obtains the monetary value that goes beyond its pure commodity value. It obtains a new form of utility. So the ramen noodle's not just valuable because you can make noodles out of it, but because it actually serves an additional function in the human economy of being able to facilitate trade. And money is important because it gets you beyond the barter stage. Barter is very inconvenient at some level. Because you have to have what's called a double coincidence of wants. I have to want your eggs, and you have to want my plywood in order to make the transaction take place. But with money, we have a kind of an independent unit that we both can agree on, and therefore we're more likely to be able to figure out terms of agreement and serve our needs better. Essentially, money also allows for accounting. So you have a unit that's outside of the pure barter economy that now allows you to calculate profits and losses. That's extremely important. So all of this is in Menger, and he explains it in great detail in his 1871 book, I believe, The Principles of Economics. And it's really a beautiful explanation. I went back to it when Bitcoin came along and tried to understand whether or not Bitcoin really looks like a Mengerian sort of thing, and I concluded that it does. Like, people argue all the time, is Bitcoin money? I'm sure you've heard that argument, right?
Of course, yeah.
And so if you read Menger, what you discover is that it's money in some ways and not money in other ways. So it's got moneyness about it, but it's an emergent money. That's neither just a direct commodity, it's not a consumable commodity, but neither is it a universal medium of exchange. So we're somewhere in between, and there's nothing wrong with that, and that's good. That sounds a little ambiguous, but the world of economics can be a little bit ambiguous. So that's Menger, and I think Bitcoiners who want to discover where Bitcoin comes from need to go back to Menger to understand how it is that it went from being just a pure bundle of titled and commodified information bits to actually acquiring money. Because it has all the properties of money. I like to say, too, that Bitcoin has an advantage over every other money that people have ever discovered because it's weightless and takes up no space. So that makes it better than gold and better than silver, actually, because then if it's weightless, then it's almost cost-free to transport, There's a service cost associated with it, but the thing itself weighs nothing. And because it takes up no space whatsoever, then every individual can have an unlimited amount and just carry it around as a pure digital good. So you don't have to trust a third party to hold your gold for you, for example. That's gigantic. I mean, those are additional money properties that Bitcoin has shown the world are advantageous that we didn't even know were advantageous until Bitcoin came along.
Yeah, it's interesting you point out those unique qualities, and I guess it is that the real key to Bitcoin's or to money's success is that utility as a medium of exchange that sets it apart from other goods or commodities, and that really is the core of what makes Bitcoin. I mean, that's all Bitcoin's got really, is that utility as a medium of exchange over other options.
Yeah, I think you stated it exactly correctly, actually. Because of the utility that it has in facilitating exchange, money obtains value. And this is, and I don't know if we're ready to move on to Mises here.
Oh, by all means.
But Mises added an additional point here, and he does it almost inadvertently in his 1912 book called The Theory of Money and Credit. So he's kind of going through the Mengerian explanation, and it takes him like 7 or maybe even 8 chapters to get all the way through this explanation because it goes into much greater detail here, and adds a little more rigor to the story that Menger just made a kind of a conjectural history. Mises tries to put it in a pure hardcore theory. But now you get to chapter 7 or chapter 8, and he's dealing with the problem of the monetarists and the people attached to the equation of exchange, and dealing with some critics that were around in 1912 that aren't around anymore. and tackled the problem, where does money obtain its initial value? Not why is it valuable, which, I mean, that Menger sort of addressed that, but how does it obtain its initial price? And that's an interesting problem. And Menger Mises was trying to address the circularity argument. Like, money is valuable because it has utility. It has utility because it's valuable. I mean, you keep explaining utility by price and price by utility, and you get into this endless circularity. And what Mises proposed is that the initial value of money emerges historically out of the barter value of money. So, for example, the initial money price of gold would be derived from gold's price in terms of other goods and services on a pure barter market, so that people are obtaining gold for, industrial uses or for jewelry or whatever. And whatever kind of barter value it has then gets absorbed into its monetary value. And Mises asserts this theory, which he later on in his 1940 book calls the regression theorem, which is just a fancy word, really. He doesn't use that phrase in 1912. But he asserts this theory as a way of kind of proving that there's no other way that money can come about. In other words, money has to have a kind of pre-existing value in a direct exchange economy or a barter economy in order for it to have any value in a monetary economy and an indirect exchange economy. Now, this is where Bitcoiners have gotten confused, or Misesians have gotten confused about Bitcoin, because they're looking at Bitcoin and going, well, here's a digital good that doesn't seem to have any value apart from its money use. This is why people are all the time saying things like, Bitcoin's not based in anything. How can it be real? It's not. It has no underlying value. It has no intrinsic value, they'll say. What this taps into an intuition that's kind of true. What they're saying is that if Bitcoin weren't a money, it wouldn't be anything, and that's a little weird, right? So like gold, if it weren't a money, would still be gold, or silver, same sort of thing. Bitcoin, it alarms people to some extent because it reminds me of like fiat dollars, in the sense that if the dollar weren't a dollar, you couldn't do anything with it, really. It would just be a piece of flat linen paper. So I was kind of, because I'd written before Bitcoin came along, written so much about the regression theorem and Mises' theory, and I thought I had it all figured out, that you the market would not and could not create a money that wasn't rooted in some sort of prior exchange relationships, because otherwise there'd be no way to price out the initial value of the money once it became a money. It wouldn't be rooted in any kind of history. So Menger's theory makes sense according to Bitcoin, but Mises's suggests a little bit of a challenge. And it took me, like, personally, about 18 months to kind of like fully figure this out. And the missing piece here, and it's the key to understanding how Mises' theory relates to Bitcoin, is to understand that Bitcoin is not just a currency, but it's also a payment system. It's a network. It lives on the blockchain. And so the initial value of Bitcoin is derived from its utility on the blockchain. And the blockchain itself, of course, is this enormously valuable service. It's not a valuable commodity the way maybe gold or salt or something like that is, but it's still, but it's a service, and it's an enormously valuable service because for the first time in history, we now have a way to bundle up, title, commodify information bits and port them peer-to-peer around the world in a way that's non-forgeable, non-reproducible, where there's no double spending, where it's time-stamped. I mean, all this stuff is amazing, right? That's what the blockchain does. So I theorized in my mind, well, this must be the actual, basically the barter value of Bitcoin is rooted in its service provision that are provided by the blockchain, right? So that was my sort of operating theory, and I thought in my mind, well, if that's true, we should be able to trace back the history of Bitcoin and see this happening. We should be able to see the blockchain in use before there was any posted price of Bitcoin itself. And the beautiful thing, of course, about the whole Bitcoin economy is that everything's documented. You can look at all the history; it's all open source, right? So I went back and checked it, right? So in my mind, I thought, okay, then if my theory is right here, we should be able to look at a period of time in which the blockchain was constantly in use, but Bitcoin had zero value. A period of testing, essentially, going on, a period of discovery to make sure the network works. And sure enough, that's what you look at when you look at the use of the blockchain after the Genesis block and before the first posted price, which was the first posted price emerges now October 5th, 2009. And the Genesis block was January 9th. Am I right about that? Something like that. So then you can actually look at the number of trades that were taking place. I mean, how often was the blockchain used over the course of those 10 months? And what you see is there's, I think I did the figures, just kind of back of the envelope, looking at activity on the blockchain. There were about 100 uses of the blockchain per day over the course of those 10 months. So what was going on? What were people doing on the blockchain before Bitcoin had value? What were they using it for? I mean, they were just testing to see if it really was able to overcome the Byzantine general's problem. They were able to try to figure out if the blockchain really worked as advertised. And then once it became really clear that you could bundle up and commodify and title information, but transport them on geographically non-contiguous basis, peer-to-peer in a way that was time-stamped, non-forgeable, non-reproducible, there's like, hey, this is freaking amazing, so, so then at some point, then Bitcoin becomes a valuable commodity. And so October 5th, suddenly the first posted price emerges on some exchange somewhere, and it's about a 15th of a penny, right? But that's the first pricing of Bitcoin that we see. So it complies exactly with Menger's sort of story, and it also fits with Mises' story. But you have to kind of tweak Mises a little bit.
This show was sponsored by bit38wallets.com, your one-stop shop for durable, encrypted paper wallets. I recently received a bunch of these in the mail, and I was really impressed. They're obviously durable, but still flexible enough to put in a legacy wallet, almost like plastic notes for those from countries where they use them, but not quite as foldable. To be honest, I wouldn't have considered using a paper wallet over secure digital storage until these turned up. Good enough is good enough. But with the multiplying number of counterparty and Mastercoin assets associated with Bitcoin private keys, it's more than just cash that many of us are securing. And the near-perfect security offered by Bit38 paper wallets saves me worrying about long-forgotten copies of wallet files left on old hard drives or whatever. Bit38 supports multiple currencies, so it's good to know that my Doge is as safe as my LTBC.
The clerics will walk up to you, and of course they're always just impeccably dressed, right? It doesn't matter your station in life. Somehow they're better than you already, and you feel a sense of intimidation and like you don't really belong, and you have a sense that every suit hanging on the rack probably costs $6,000. You see a tie you like, you pick it up, and it's like $350, and you try not to reveal your shock in your face. You just go, well, that's okay, but you have this, you're sort of sweating it out, and you can't wait to get out of the store. So just one secret to get these bastards back for having made you feel shabby about yourself is just when the salesman walks up to you and says, "Sir, is there anything I can help you with?" All you have to do is say, "Yes, I'm actually wanted to look at your collars." I'm sorry, sir, we don't. Collars? Yeah, collars. I'm not interested in shirts. I just want to look at collars. Well, I'm afraid we don't have those here. You mean you don't have uh, detachable collars here that are separate from the shirts at all? Like you don't even have one in this entire store? No, sir. I'm sorry. All of our collars, as far as I know, are entirely attached to our shirts. You go, well, if that's the way it's going to be, thanks very much. So that'll cause him to wither.
But the next time I need a store clerk to wither, I'll be sure to ask about detachable collars. I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will.
Yeah, you'll be legendary, right? You
Yeah,
can't believe what that guy just asked for. He'll tell the
yeah, I
manager.
think that would get around New Zealand pretty quick. If
Yeah,
yeah, sure.
the manager will be like, God, I don't think I've ever seen those even at the market. What the heck, you know? So you're so fortunate to live in New Zealand. It's the greatest place in the world, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. You know, of course we take it for granted. So
I just fell in love. I mean, I guess everybody does, right? You go to New Zealand. There's a perception that it's a relatively free economy, you know, as compared to the U.S. And you know, all the scenery looks like it was done in Hollywood with using CGI. There's a beautiful spirit of all the people, the way people handle time and sociability, and I mean, just everything's it's just such a lovely place. And I tell you, there's something else that's a little bit funny about New Zealand, because the time is so strange. I mean, like New Zealand runs, it's like a day ahead or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, but it's uncertain. Like so for say for example, you know, like in the U.S. Today it's Wednesday morning, but for you it's probably like Thursday night or something. I don't know how this works.
4 a.m. Thursday. Oh, Friday.
Oh, 4 a.m. It's Friday. Okay, so this is Thursday morning, I guess. So it's 4 a.m. Friday for you. Yeah, so when you're in New Zealand, you have some illusory sense that you're actually you've got a day on the rest of the world. So because you're kind of living in the future, you really don't have to do that. You don't have to worry about much. Everything's right, you know. So you sort of detach yourself mentally from the stream of events from the rest of the world. It's quite liberating in some way. I know that this is an illusion. Like there's no such thing as, it's not like you're living tomorrow and I'm living today. That's not it. Obviously, there's only now, but still the way that the time works, it creates this sort of beautiful mental state when you're in New Zealand that you've still got a day, you know, ahead of the rest of the world, you know, to finish your work and whatever. It's exceedingly dangerous, you know, and at some level. You lose all sense of anxiety, and you know, probably people live long lives in New Zealand because, you know, they don't have heart attacks and stuff like that. Probably I don't know, but I felt a tremendous sense of liberation while I was there. I could have just at so many people I ran into in New Zealand said that I said, when did you come? And they said, well, it was about 10 years ago. I came for like a trip and I just never left. That's really common. It's pretty funny. I really had that sense, and then Fran, you know, while I was there, he has this really beautiful house, you know, that we were hanging around in and stuff like that, and it had like 5 bedrooms or something. And he said to me, "Look, you're more than welcome to stay. You can stay for a month. Really, it's fine by me." And I briefly, like, toyed with the idea. You know, I just thought, "Wow, what if I didn't hail a cab tomorrow morning to go to the airport? What if I just stuck around?" You know, and I was wildly tempted by this. And the only thing that really stopped it was that, well, first of all, the fact that I had to be back, but beyond that, the prices of international tickets are so exorbitant. I thought, you know, that this would end up costing me a tremendous amount of money. But it's just so tempting. You just don't want to leave. And I guess you know about my helicopter ride, which I paid with.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So I bought a helicopter ride with Bitcoin, and that was the first time in New Zealand, and I was thrilled to be part of that little expedition. So that was exciting. To use Bitcoin overseas is a really interesting thing, because I'm not entirely sure that I realized until that moment the implications of the fact that Bitcoin is a global currency. it's not a national currency. It's a universal. It's a global currency. So, a helicopter ride in New Zealand and a helicopter ride in Houston, Texas, or in Anchorage, Alaska, whatever, can be priced in terms of Bitcoin in a way that's thoroughly consistent, and you technically don't need to deal with the problem of exchange rates anymore. And I guess I'm kind of like an experiential person in a way. Like, I didn't entirely realize the implications of this, but when I went to pay, they gave me the New Zealand dollar Bitcoin exchange rate and priced it in terms of Bitcoin. And my first response was, well, okay, how does this work in terms of dollars, right? So I'm looking at my wallet, and I wanted to kind of price that out in terms of dollars, and I thought I'd have to convert the helicopter ride price from New Zealand dollars to US dollars and then into Bitcoin. Do you follow what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Right. And then I suddenly, it hit me like, wow, wait, I don't have to do that, actually. I only need to know the Bitcoin price and give you that amount of Bitcoin. I don't even have to deal with dollar exchange rates at all. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's eerie actually to use Bitcoin to pay for things. I find, especially online, just paying for things like web development or something like that, or like I had a logo designed recently, and it's just so easy. It just goes like that. You can just bounty this little task off online, and someone can pick it up and do it in an afternoon or whatever. And
well, in the 19th century. God, this interview is giving me so many things I want to write about. But in the 19th century, national currencies were just different names for the same thing. And that same thing was gold, particularly late 19th century. So we had a universal currency called gold. It's just that, but the money substitutes basically were created by the individual nations, and they were given different names, but there were no real exchange rates between currencies. There was only that sort of underlying specie value of gold itself. Well, now that was suspended basically in World War I, and we never really got back a decent universal system after that. And here we are in the 21st century, and now we've got a kind of a new gold. So the Bitcoin becomes this universal currency, and the exchange rates into national monies are just different expressions of that same underlying commodity value called Bitcoin. So it's very interesting the ways in which I'm always intrigued by this, that Bitcoin is on one hand like a restoration of a kind of an early modern currency, maybe from the Renaissance or the period of the Enlightenment, in the sense that it's this universal fundamental thing that you trade peer to peer, combined with this outrageous 21st century technological invention. It's like you get like 500 years of history all crammed into one little protocol. So lovely.
9 pages, eh? Yeah.
So I don't think anybody's written about this subject, and I might end up having to be the one to do it unless there's somebody more competent that can do it, to explain the implications of Bitcoin for international currency trading, because we faced a problem of exchange rates now for going on 40 years, ever since Nixon sort of finally closed the gold window and ended the period of Bretton Woods. And so, it's just inefficient for all business all over the world to constantly deal with these floating exchange rates all the time. It interrupts business dealings and hobbles the division of labor. It makes it difficult for us to communicate and do business abroad, really. We're used to it, but it's a tremendous cost. Bitcoin actually will take that away from us, so that we can just, we can all just deal in Bitcoin rather than having to go through these national currency floating exchange rate problems.
Well, that'll be the day. Man.
Yeah. So the implications of that are really... So there's something that was really interesting to think about. I mean, economists have not liked floating exchange rates for a very long time, and I think there's a good reason not to. They're not a natural state. I mean, there's no such thing as a national currency zone in a pure market environment. There's no reason for Canada, Mexico, U.S., New Zealand, and the UK and Europe and to all have separate currencies. It actually doesn't make any sense. We're a global economy. We should all be using currencies that we all understand and shouldn't have these constant floating between currencies. It's actually an unsustainable and strange situation that doesn't fit with history, and it's not what efficient, good economies want to have happened. It's just a kind of an accident of history. And maybe in 50 years it won't exist.
But the purpose is to give us central control over our economy, though.
Oh, the purpose of national currencies? Yeah, I think that's basically what happened.
And the ability to deflate our way out of debt, or to inflate our way out of debt.
Yeah, that's right. The purpose of the monetary system is to serve the nation state. That's the primary purpose. Today, that's the purpose. That's not the original purpose of money, but that's what it's used for today. And it doesn't make any sense because we live in a radically globalized economic structure.
That being the case, how do you see the relationship between Bitcoin and the state?
It's necessarily and structurally a part of the market, and you could say the same thing that was true of gold in the 19th century, or in the 17th century, for that matter. But governments took over the gold standard and used it for their own purposes, and eventually destroyed it. It's a question of whether or not governments could do the same thing to Bitcoin. But I think that the protocol has sort of thought this through. The fact that it lives on a distributed network and is an open source protocol immunizes it to a great extent from government control. Of course, they can regulate the use of Bitcoin insofar as we're still relying on these kind of ongoing conversions between Bitcoin and the national currency. You know, the coming and going is what they're most interested in, and that's where they can really sink their teeth into the whole thing. And they can and they will. But the more heavy-handed the regulations become, the more they incentivize people to leave the national currency market and enter into the Bitcoin space exclusively. That's what I'm looking forward to. You know, the more they regulate it and the more they penalize and structurally try to control the exchanges, the more they just, you know, incentivize people to move into a pure Bitcoin environment, where I don't think that governments really have anything like the control over Bitcoin that they currently have over the monetary system. I think they can have some to some extent, but it's incomparable really to the ways which governments took over gold and currently manage the national economies. You know, sometimes people say that I'm the key theorist or the pusher of this idea that Bitcoin will destroy the nation state, and I do believe that. I just don't think it's going to happen directly. I think it's going to happen gradually over time. The reason I say that is that control of the money is really, really essential to Leviathan, as we've come to understand in the course of the 20th century. Once you take money out of the hands of the state, you're really rolling back the system in a major and big way. I don't see Leviathan as being sustainable in light of a crypto world.
Yeah, having that central control over money, which is that economic representation of your labor and your effort and your wealth, you know, and your influence on the world. If you bottleneck that, you know, to this, you know, if you create this bottleneck of the state, which has central control over that representation, you really do give them total control.
You really do. You know, the old cliche is that money is half of every transaction, and you know, that's truth. In what sense can you say you live in a real capitalistic market economy where half of every transaction is controlled by the state, and it's direct control? I mean, it's the state manufactures the money, they produce the money, they're regulating the use of money, they ultimately control its value through its policies of inflation. It really is a kind of a socialistically provided good, or really I don't know if socialism is the right word, but it's a kind of nationalization that's taken place over the course of the 20th century. So liberating money from that is, there's profound implications for politics, for economics, for culture and society, really. The cultural point is a very interesting one because we're so used to money losing value all the time. Generally, I think in the Bitcoin world, we can expect the value of Bitcoin to increase relative to goods and services. So its purchasing power will tend to be always intensified and growing over time rather than falling. And that has really interesting implications for how we approach our economic lives. People are very inclined to want to save Bitcoin rather than spend it, actually, because of the anticipation that it's going to be more valuable in the future than it is in the present. And that changes our decisions. It changes our relationship to the material world. A lot of the sort of materialism of our times has been subsidized by this perception of an inflationary currency. Like it's better to have a house and a car and fill your house with a lot of stuff and spend your money than it is to hold on to money and to save it, because you just can't make a lot of money when you save it. Your dollar's going to be worth less in the future than it is today. So it disincentivizes saving and subsidizes a kind of a consumerist materialist mentality. If we move into a Bitcoin world, we're going to see that whole thing reversed. People are going to reassess the value of their physical property and rethink the value of savings. So it's going to kind of, and that in turn will lead to a greater degree of capital accumulation, which subsidizes development and general prosperity down the line. So the implications of that are actually really dramatic for culture and economy, and then of course for politics. Sometimes when I think about the implications of all this stuff, it blows my mind, really.
Yeah, it feels like the kind of the harbinger of a new age.
Yeah, I think it does, and we're all gonna have to wait and see what the effects of this is going to be. But I think essentially we've underestimated the damage that government-based fiat central banking has done to the world, and I think we also underestimate the implications of cryptocurrency and how it's going to shape our lives in the future.
Well, on that note, I've got to go back to bed.
Okay. Thank you for getting up at 4 a.m. You're very sweet to get up and conduct this interview with me. I've really, really enjoyed it, and I look forward to sending it out. If anybody wants to come anywhere and see my work, I write almost every day at liberty.me, which is my kind of social and publishing platform. That I would encourage all the listeners to join. I think we're running a special right now for $5 a month, and you can get in, and it's a wonderful place to hang out and talk to a lot of crypto people, and it's a kind of a global, liberty-minded community. And also, I also work for the Foundation for Economic Education, fee.org, and I have a lot of my writings up there, and I'm happy for people to go visit that beautiful institution.
All right. Actually, I've used Mises.org a lot. That's one of my primary resources when it comes to anything that goes beyond white papers and forums.
Sure. Well, I spent 15 years uploading books and primary stuff there, readings and all sorts of things. So that's an extremely valuable resource as well. Yeah.
Cheers.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And that's us. Thank you, Jeffrey, for the great conversation, BIP38wallets.com for your sponsorship, and also Ceases for the music. For the Let's Talk Bitcoin community, today's magic word is Austrian. That's AUSTRIAN. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week, or the week after.